Everybody in Sulphur Draw knew what Elias Rourke owned. 40 acres of hardpan, a house his father built with green lumber that never stopped complaining about it, one good mare, and a debt at the bank in Bowie that he chipped at the way a man chips at a mountain. Then, on a Tuesday night in September, the fire took all of it in about the time it takes to boil coffee. What nobody in Sulphur Draw knew, what I didn't know, and I was standing right there with my boots smoking, was that a woman was already on the road, coming north from the reservation road with a folded letter in her dress and a name in it that wasn't hers. She wasn't what he ordered. She wasn't what any of us would have chosen. And she was the only one who didn't look at that black square of ash and start doing arithmetic on what Elias Rourke was worth now. I've kept a tally book for 31 years. Every debt I owe, every debt owed me. I've written down some strange entries. I never wrote down what she cost him. I couldn't figure out which column it belonged in. The heat came off it like a hand shoving my chest. I had Elias by the back of his shirt and both my heels dug into the dirt of his own yard, and he was fighting me the way a hooked catfish fights, all shoulder, no sense. He wanted back inside. The doorway was a mouth by then, orange all the way through, and the roof breathing in and out like it was alive and enjoying itself. Elias, I got a fistful of his collar. Elias, there ain't nothing in there. He said something, I didn't hear the words, I heard the shape of them. Then the front wall folded, and it made a sound I've only heard twice in my life, a great soft whump, like a book closed hard, and the heat rolled over us and we both went down in the yard with our arms over our heads, and I felt my eyebrows curl and stink. I lay there a second, cheek in the dirt, and I counted. I do that, always have. My wife, God rest her, said I'd count the nails in my own coffin. 22. 22 sparks lighting on the roof of the barn, 40 yards off, and every one of them going out because the wind was blowing east and the barn lived because of it. The house didn't. Elias got up on his knees. He was 41 years old and he had ash in his beard, and his hands were open in front of him, palms up, the way a man holds his hands when somebody has handed him something and he can't figure what it is. The trivet, he said. What? My mother's trivet, it's on the stove. Elias. It's iron, he said. Iron don't burn. I said, sit down. And he sat down. And we watched the house his father built go from a house to a shape to a glow, and the fire got quieter as it ate, the way anything does when it's had enough. And around 3 in the morning it was just a red map of coals lying in a rectangle, and the stars came back out overhead like they'd been waiting politely for it to finish. Here is what the fire left him. One barn, sway-backed, 40 yards east. One mare, Juno, 11 years old, blind in the off-eye, who had kicked her stall to splinters and stood in the corral trembling with her nostrils flared so wide I could have put my thumb in one. $206 in seed money gone. It was in the wall. He'd put it in the wall like a fool, like every man out here who doesn't trust the bank he owes money to. One shirt being the one on him. One pair of boots. A well with good water. The clothes on his back, and 40 acres of ground that would grow beans if you begged it. And a note at the Bowie Bank for $411 payable in November. And a letter. He kept it in his vest, so it lived. That's the whole reason any of this happened. Because a fire that ate a piano and a Bible and a bed his grandmother died in couldn't reach one folded letter that was buttoned inside a vest pocket over a man's heart. I didn't know about the letter yet. Nobody did. I ran cattle 3 miles west of him, the Cathcart place, if you want to call 400 acres of rock and grama grass a place. I'd known Elias since he was a kid with a slingshot and an attitude. His father had been a hard man in the way of hard men who never once said so out loud. Elias had gotten the hardness and not the silence. He argued with everything. He argued with weather. He came and slept in my hay for 3 nights, and argued with me about that too. I'll pay you back, he said, first morning, standing in my kitchen doorway with a bowl of my beans in his hands and not eating them. It's beans. I'll pay you back for the beans. Elias. Write it down, he said. You got that book, write it down. And because he was standing there with his hands shaking and his eyes red-rimmed, and he needed something in this world to be orderly, I got the tally book and I licked the pencil and I wrote, E. Rourke beans, 1 bowl. And I showed it to him. He nodded, he sat down, he ate. That's a thing I've never been able to explain right. He could not accept the beans. He could accept the debt. Fourth day he was out at the burn with a garden rake going over it in sections. Systematic. He'd made a grid in his head. 6 feet by 6 feet, rake it, sift it, move on. Face and forearms black. He'd found the trivet on day 2, and he'd cleaned it on his pant leg and set it on a stump at the edge of the yard, and he wouldn't touch it after that. He'd just look over at it every so often to make sure it was still there. By day 4, the stump had the trivet, a door hinge, the metal parts of a bed frame, and a coffee tin so warped it looked like a thing that had been screaming. That's where he was, kneeling in his own ashes with a rake, when Holly's Teague came up the wagon road. Teague owned the water on the north side of the draw and about half of everything else. He was not a bad man. I want to be fair. He was a man who saw an opportunity the way a hawk sees a movement in the grass, without malice and without hesitating. He didn't get down. He sat in the saddle and looked at the burn a long while, and he said, Elias, God Almighty, I'm sorry. Elias kept raking. I mean that, Teague said. I woke my whole house up. We could see it from the porch, looked like the end of the world. It was, Elias said. Teague let that sit. Then, you got a note coming due. The rake stopped. I'd take the 40, Teague said. Not for the ground, you understand. Ground's no good, it's the well. I'd give you 300 for it. Cash today. You'd walk away square with the bank and have money in your pocket, and you could take that mare and go to Tucson and start clean. I was leaning on the corral fence, and I heard Elias' breath go in. 300 was not a fair price. It was not an insulting price either. It was the exact price of a man who has calculated precisely how much desperation is in front of him, and has decided to leave $1 worth of dignity in it. Elias stood up. Ash slid off his knees. No, he said. Think on it. I have thought on it just now, standing up. It took the whole time it took to stand up. Teague nodded slow. He wasn't angry. That was the worst of it. He wasn't even angry. He touched his hat brim and he said, It'll still be 300 in November. And he rode off. And the offer just hung there in the yard afterward like smoke that wouldn't clear. Elias got back down on his knees and started raking again. I said that was a fairish price. I know it. November's 8 weeks. I know it, Wick. What are you going to do in 8 weeks with a barn and a blind mare? He raked, sifted, moved his 6 feet, and he said, not looking up, in a voice like a man reciting scripture he no longer believes. Something. The wagon came on the 6th day. It was Ollie Fisk's freight wagon, the one that runs Bowie to the agency road and back, and Ollie was sitting up on the seat looking like a man carrying a wasp nest he'd agreed to hold as a favor. He pulled up in the yard. He looked at the burn. He looked at me. He looked back down the road like he was measuring how fast he could get gone. Rourke here. Elias came around the barn with a bucket. And Ollie said, well, she's here. There was a woman sitting in the back of that wagon. She got down before anybody offered. She was maybe 25, though I'm a poor judge and always have been. Dark and Apache, Chiricahua, I found out later, though I'd have known Apache from 20 rods off, and I want to be honest about the fact that my first feeling was not welcome. I was raised on the wrong stories. Every man in that county was. She wore a gray dress that had been made for a taller woman, and moccasins, and her hair was cut short at the shoulder, morning cut. I'd learn. And she carried a flour sack with something square in the bottom of it. She stood in the yard and looked at the black rectangle where the house had been. She looked at it for a long time, longer than she looked at any of us. Elias said, "Ollie." "Who is that?" And Ollie Fisk, God help him, pulled a folded paper out of his coat and held it out at arm's length like it might bite and said, "Elias, I just haul what's give me. Here's how it was." 3 months prior, Elias Rourke, who could not talk to a woman at a dance without his ears going scarlet, had written to an outfit in Kansas City that arranged what they called correspondence marriages. He'd sent $11 out of the 206 in the wall. He'd gotten back a letter and a name. Miss Corrine Ballard of Sedalia, Missouri, age 29, a milliner in good health, willing. He'd written her 4 times. She'd written him twice. In the second letter she said she would come, and she named a month, and the month was September. And on the 29th of August, in a hotel in Bowie, Miss Corrine Ballard of Sedalia, Missouri, had taken one look at the country out the window, at the creosote and the white sun and the 800 miles of nothing between her and a milliner's shop. And she had sold her onward passage, and bought a return ticket, and left the letter and the arrangement and Elias Rourke's 4 honest, badly spelled pages behind on the washstand. The woman standing in the yard had been washing at that hotel. She'd found the letter. She could read. The mission school at San Carlos had seen to that much, along with a great deal else that had cost her more than it gave. She'd read 4 pages from a man who described his 40 acres like a man describing a woman he was ashamed of loving. She'd read the part where he wrote that the country was hard, but that a person could hold on if there was somebody to hold on with. She had a dead husband and a dead brother, and no home to go back to that anybody would call a home. She had walked to the freight yard and asked what it cost to go to Sulphur Draw. Her name was Nolan. She gave us a mission name too, the way you'd hand a stranger a coin so he'll leave you alone, and I'm not going to write that one down. Elias read the letter Ollie handed him, his own letter, the one he'd sent, with a note in a different hand on the back of the last page. 4 lines. I never saw them. He read it twice and his face did nothing at all, and then he folded it up and put it in his vest pocket with the other one, and he said, "I got no house." She said, "I see that." "I got no money. I got a barn and a mare and a note at the bank." "I see that too." "Then you see there's nothing here." And she set the flour sack down in the dirt, very gently, the way you'd set down something sleeping, and she said, and I have thought about the way she said it every year since, in the winter, when I can't sleep. "That is not what I see." Elias looked at her, and I watched something in his face come apart very slightly and then get pulled back together fast, the way a man snatches back a hand from a stove. "Ollie," he said, "take her back." Ollie was already climbing up. "I ain't going back till Thursday." "Then Thursday." "Sure," said Ollie, and he snapped the reins, and he was a 1/4 mile down the road before the dusk closed behind him, and it was Saturday. She slept in the barn. He slept in the barn. There were 40 feet of barn between them, and he lay awake all night on his side of it. I know because I came by at dawn to bring flour, and he was sitting outside on the mounting block with his eyes like 2 burnt holes in a blanket. "She's still here," he said. "I see that." "I'm not going to," he stopped, started over. "It ain't decent. There's no house. There's no preacher. There's no, I ordered a wife like a man orders a plow and she didn't come, and this one." He stopped again. "This one what?" I said. He rubbed his face. "This one didn't get ordered." Inside the barn there was a sound, a rhythm, and we both turned. She had found the flour I'd brought last week. She'd found the coffee tin, the warped one from the stump, and she'd worked the lid off it somehow, and there was coffee in the bottom, a scorched handful of it, and she was making a fire in the barn's stone corner, and she was going to make coffee out of a tin that had been in a house fire. Elias got up like something had bitten him. You can't drink that, it's." She handed him a cup. He held it. He looked at the surface of it. It was black and it smelled like a burnt house. It smelled like the worst night of his life, and he was standing in a barn holding it in both hands with his shoulders up around his ears. He drank it. I watched a man drink his own house. And when he was done, he stood there breathing and he said, "Horse, it's bad." And she said, "Yes." And he laughed, one crack of it like a board breaking. I'm going to say the next part quick because it went quick, and because I don't want to make it sound like some sweetness it wasn't. It wasn't sweet. It was two people working. She could not cook white bread and she did not try. She made ash cakes on a flat rock, and they were better than anything I made in my own kitchen. She looked at that blind mare, Juno, for 2 days without touching her, just standing where the mare could see her with the good eye. And on the 3rd day she walked up and put her hand flat on the mare's neck, and the mare didn't so much as swing her head. Elias watched that from the barn door. He'd been fighting that horse for 11 years. She knew the plants. The well casing had a crack in it, and she found the crack. She could set a snare with a piece of wire and a bent stick, and she brought in 3 jackrabbits in 4 days, which was 3 more than Elias had brought in, and she skinned them out back where he wouldn't have to watch, which was a kindness he never once mentioned, and I saw him notice every time. And she worked the burn. That's the thing that undid him. He'd made his grid, and he'd been going through it alone for a week, and the 8th morning he came out and she was in the far corner of it on her knees in the ash with her hands in the black up to the wrist, sifting. Her gray dress was gray no more. She had found nothing. She kept going. He said, "You don't have to do that." She said without looking up, "There's a hinge here." "It's a hinge, it's nothing, it's a hinge." She lifted it out and set it on the stump with the others, and she wiped her hands on her ruined dress and she looked at him. She had a way of looking that was not soft. I want to make that plain. There was nothing soft in it. She looked at him the way a person looks at a wall they intend to climb. She said, "You keep saying nothing." He didn't answer. "You have said nothing 9 times since I came." She held up the hinge. "This is not nothing. That horse is not nothing. That well is not nothing." Her voice never went up. That's what got him. It never went up. You want a man to come and buy your ground for $300 and you want to tell him you have nothing, and then you want to be right. Elias stood in the middle of his burnt house with a rake in his hand and his jaw working. Then he turned and walked out to the corral and stood with his forehead against Juno's neck for about 10 minutes. And then he came back and got down in the ash on the other side of the grid from her and started sifting. They didn't talk. It was 2 people on their knees in the ruins of a house going through it handful by handful, and the wind came up around noon and lifted the ash and it went over both of them the same, and there was no way from where I stood at the fence to tell one of them from the other. I wrote in my book that night. I didn't write a debt. I didn't know how to enter it. I wrote, "Something is happening at Rourke's, and I don't know its name." Now I have to tell the rest. On the 11th day, the sheriff came out from Bowie with 2 men. Not a posse. He'd have said not a posse. 3 men on horses with rifles under their knees is whatever you'd like to call it. His name was Deacon, and he was tired the way all of them were tired that year. It was 1886. Geronimo had come in that same month, down in Skeleton Canyon, and every white man in the territory had spent 4 years going to bed with a shotgun and had no earthly idea how to stop. Deacon sat his horse and looked at the barn, and at the burn, and at the woman standing in the barn door with a bucket in her hand. He said, "Elias, who's that?" Elias said, "That's my business. There was a fire at the Kessler place, night before yours." I felt the ground tilt slightly. I hadn't heard. "Kessler's outbuilding," Deacon went on. "And there was a fire in Bowie at the freight barn week before. 3 fires, Elias. 3 fires in 18 days, and I got men in town saying it's Apache, and I got other men saying it's insurance, and I got to come out here and stand in your yard and look at." He moved one finger, not even a whole hand, at Nolan. "That, and you tell me it's your business." Elias said, "She came Saturday, on Ollie's wagon. My house burned Tuesday. Ollie says she came from the agency road." She came from the hotel in Bowie. And I'm sure she'll say so. Nolan set the bucket down and stood very straight and said nothing at all, and I saw that she had done this before. That is a terrible thing to watch a person be good at. Deacon sat there a while. He wasn't a cruel man. He was a tired man with a town behind him, and he did the arithmetic every tired man does, and he said, "Rourke, you got a note at the bank. Everybody knows it. Man with a note and a house that burns down and no money in the ashes." He paused. There was no money in the ashes, was there? Elias' face went white under the soot. $206, he said. In the wall. In the wall, said Deacon. And then he looked at me, and he said, "Wick, you been out here every day. Anything you want to tell me?" And here it is. Here's the part I've never told straight to another living soul, and I'm 68 years old and my hands aren't good anymore, and I want it written down somewhere before I go. The morning before the 10th day, I had been out at the northeast corner of the burn, kicking through it while Elias filled the water trough, and my boot had turned something up out of the ash. A can. A 5-gallon coal oil can, blackened, the seams sprung. Elias didn't keep coal oil. He couldn't afford coal oil. He burned tallow and he complained about the dark. I'd stood there with that can at my feet for maybe 4 seconds. And I'd looked up, and across the black square of that house, Elias Rourke was standing at the trough with the bucket in his hand, and the water running over, and he was looking straight at me. He didn't say anything. He didn't move. He just looked at me, and his face was the face of a man watching something arrive that he has been expecting for 11 days. Then he turned around and finished filling the trough. And I put my boot on that can and pushed it back down under the ash, and I walked away, and I didn't sleep that night. Now Deacon was sitting his horse in the yard, and 3 men had rifles under their knees, and a woman was standing in the barn door with her chin up, and the sheriff of Cochise County was looking at me and waiting. He said again, "Anything you want to tell me, Wick?" And I opened my mouth. I said, "She came Saturday. I saw Ollie's wagon come up that road with my own eyes." Which was true. I have spent 31 years putting true things in a book. Debts, weights, dates, the price of salt. And I want it understood that what I said to Deacon was true in every particular, and that I have never told a worse lie in my life. Deacon looked at me for about the length of time it takes a man to decide he doesn't want to know something. Then he shifted in the saddle and the leather made that long complaining sound, and he said, "Saturday." Saturday. Ollie says the agency road. Ollie hauls out of Bowie. The Bowie Road is the agency road for 11 miles. Ollie ain't a liar. He's just a man who don't know the difference between where a thing started and where he picked it up. One of Deacon's men snorted. Small mercy. Deacon didn't smile. He said, "Rourke, I'm going to want you in town Thursday." I got no horse to spare. "Then walk," Deacon said, and turned his horse, and the 3 of them went down the wagon road at a walk, unhurried, the way men leave a place they intend to come back to. The dust hung a long while. Nobody in that yard moved until it settled. Then Nolan picked up her bucket and went to the well. I stayed for supper. I didn't want to. There was a thing sitting under the ash 40 feet from where we ate, and it was in me like a swallowed pin. She made the rabbit with something, some root, some seed, and I ate it out of a warped tin, and it was good, and Elias didn't eat. He held his plate. He looked at the burn with the last of the light going red across it, and the coals were long dead, but the light made it look like it was thinking about starting up again. I said, "Elias, don't." "Elias, there's a coal oil can in your ashes." Nolan's hand stopped. She was scraping the flat rock clean, and her hand stopped, and she did not look at me, and she did not look at him, and in that little arrest of motion I understood, the way you understand a card that's already been turned, that she had known about it longer than I had. Elias set his plate down in the dirt. "2 of them," he said. I sat there. There's a 5-gallon and there's a 1-gallon, and the 1-gallon's under the floor joist at the north end, or was. He rubbed his mouth with the back of his hand. I bought them in July, off the drummer that comes through with the wagon of tin goods, paid $4.40 and told him it was for lamps. Elias, I ain't had a lamp in this house since my father died. The wind came up off the draw and went through the burn and lifted a little ash and set it down again. Say the rest, Nolan said. He looked at her, and I watched him understand that she had known, and that she had gone on sifting his ashes on her knees for 8 days anyway, and something moved across his face that I couldn't put a word to then and can't now. He said it to her, not to me. The note comes due in November. It's $411. I had 206 in the wall and a crop of beans that come to nothing because it didn't rain in June and it didn't rain in July. And in August, I sat at my own table for 4 nights with those cans by the stove and worked out how a man does it. Where you start it. What time. How long you wait before you run for the neighbors so it's seen that you run. There's no insurance on a house out here, I said stupidly. There's the bank, he said. House burns, ground still ground. The bank don't want ground. Bank wants a man to keep paying. Man with a house pays. Man with no house. His voice went to gravel. Man with no house can be given time. I was going to burn my father's house down and go into that bank in Bowie with ash on my hat and ask for time. The dark came up out of the ground the way it does out there, from the bottom up. 4 nights, he said. And the 4th night I took both cans out to the barn and put them under the seed sacks, and I came back in and I lay on my mother's bed and I shook like a dog until sunup. And I didn't do it. He looked at his hands. I didn't do it, Wick. Then how? The stove, he said. There's a crack in the chimney where it goes through the roof board. I've known about it 2 years, I've known. He laughed, and it was an awful thing to hear. I was going to fix it with the seed money, in the spring. I sat there with a tin plate on my knee. The cans were in the barn, I said. Somebody moved them. And there it was, laid down in the middle of us like a butchered thing. I moved them, Nolan said. She said it flat. She'd finished scraping the rock. She set it down and wiped her palms on that ruined dress and sat back on her heels and looked at Elias across the little fire. And she was, I swear before God, the calmest person in Cochise County. The 3rd day, she said, I went in the barn for the wire. The seed sacks were rotted through at the bottom, and there were 2 cans standing in the corner where the rain comes in, and one of them was full and one was half. She paused. A man does not keep coal oil he does not use in a place he does not want it found. Elias' mouth opened. I carried them out at night, she said. I put them in the ash where the corner of the house had been, and I turned them over so they filled, and I raked over them. He couldn't get the rest of it. You put them in the burn. Where else? You put the evidence. In the fire, she said, where it belongs, where it looks like it has always been. A can in a barn is a man's plan. She said it slowly, the way you explain a thing to a child or to a man who is very tired. A can in a burned house is a can that burned in a house. I put my plate down. My hands had gone cold. She'd done it before I ever found it. She'd buried a lie under the ash and gone on her knees in the same ash every morning after, sifting for hinges, with her own crime 6 feet from her hands and her face as still as a stone in a creek. Elias stood up. He walked out into the burn in the dark, and he stood in the middle of the black rectangle where the kitchen had been, and I heard him breathing from 30 feet away. Then he came back and knelt down in front of her, not a lover's kneel, nothing of the kind. It was a man's knees giving out, and he said, "Why?" And she said, "Because you have been telling everyone you have nothing, and a man who says he has nothing will one day tell it to a sheriff." I rode home at midnight, and I got out the tally book at my own table with a candle, and I sat over it a long time. Here is what I wrote, and it is the only entry in 31 years I ever wrote in ink. Sep 22, Rourke did not burn his house. He meant to, she hid it. I lied to Deacon. This is the account as I have it. Then I put the book in the flour crock and I went to bed and I did not sleep, and I have never taken that page out. It's in there yet. Thursday, Elias walked to Bowie. 11 miles. He left before light. Nolan stood at the corral with Juno's face against her shoulder and watched him go over the rise, and I sat on my horse and watched her watch him. She said without turning, "He will tell them." "He won't." "He will." She stroked the mare's blind side, the bad eye, the milky one. "He is a man who cannot take a bowl of beans without writing it down." I didn't have an answer for that. She said, "Will they hang him?" "For a house that burned from a chimney crack, nobody hangs for that." "For 2 cans. I stopped. Because in that year in that county, with 3 fires and a town that hadn't slept in 4 years, and a woman in the barn who looked like everything they were afraid of, they'll want somebody," I said. "That's all it is. It's not justice. It's arithmetic. They want the columns to come out even." She nodded slowly, like I'd finally said something worth the ride out. And then she said, "Then I will make them come out even." He came back at dusk with his boots gone through and his face gray. He hadn't told them. He'd sat in a chair in Deacon's office for 2 hours and answered questions about the stove and the wall and the $206 and the woman, mostly the woman, and he had lied by every silence he had in him, and it had cost him something you could see from across a yard. He sat down on the mounting block and put his head in his hands. "They found a can," he said. "The bottom went out of my stomach. Not mine. In Bowie, behind the freight barn. Deacon's got a man in the jail for it, some drifter that was sleeping under the loading dock, and the man says he never, and Deacon don't care much whether he did." He lifted his head. "Wick, that man's going to hang for 3 fires and one of 'em's mine, and it wasn't him and it wasn't me." Nolan came out of the barn with the lamp, my lamp. I'd brought it, and set it on the block beside him. The light went up under his jaw. "Then say it was the chimney," she said. "They asked me was there coal oil in the house. And I said," he shut his eyes, "I said no." She was quiet a moment. "That is true," she said. "It's a lie." "It is true," she said hard, the first time I ever heard her voice come up, "and it will still be true when they pull those cans out of your ash because they were never in your house. Say it again. Say it until it stops cutting you." He didn't say it again. He sat there with the lamp on him and the dark all around, and Nolan went and got the trivet off the stump and put it in his hands, and he held it, that black iron thing his mother had set 100 pans on, and he bent over it. I went home, some things a neighbor doesn't watch. Teague came back the 2nd week of October. He came in a buckboard this time, which is a thing men do when they mean to be sat with. He had a jug of good whiskey on the seat, and he didn't bring it out, which I respected. He got down and stood at the edge of the burn with his hat in his hands like it was a grave, and maybe to him it was. 250, he said. Elias said it was 3. That was 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks ago you had 6 weeks. Teague turned his hat around. Elias, there's talk in town. There's talk about the fires and there's talk about. He tipped his head an inch toward the barn, and there's men saying Deacon's been slow. I don't hold with any of it, but I'll tell you what I can do. I can go into Bowie and I can say to men who listen to me that Elias Rourke's chimney was cracked, and that I saw the crack myself 2 years back when I helped him set the ridgepole. He paused, which I did. You never. I did, Teague said mildly. You were 16 and your daddy was drunk and I set that ridgepole and you handed me nails. And there was a crack in that chimney board and I told him about it and he told me to mind my own house. He looked at the burn. I'd say that in town, to whoever asked. Nobody spoke. 250, Teague said, and I say it. Or nothing and I say nothing. And I'd not be lying either way, Elias, that's the, and here for 1 second that hawk face went somewhere else, went almost sorry. That's the ugly part of it. I'd not be lying either way. He got back in the buckboard. November, he said and went. Elias had $250 offered and 411 owed, and no way in this world to close the difference. And I did not have it. I want that written too. I had cattle I couldn't sell till spring and a mortgage of my own, and I offered him $90 and he wouldn't take it, and we said things to each other in my kitchen that I'm glad nobody heard. And in the last week of October, Nalin walked to Bowie. She didn't tell him. She left before light the way he had, and she took the letter, his letter, the 4 honest badly spelled pages, and she walked 11 miles in moccasins and went to the hotel where she had washed sheets for 6 weeks, and she asked the woman there to come with her to the sheriff's office. And she stood in front of Deacon and gave him her name. Her whole name, the one she'd never given us, and the agency number that went with it, that had been written on a card in a wooden box at San Carlos since she was 14 years old. She told him the date she left the agency, and the name of the man who signed her pass, and the name of the woman she washed for, and the day she read a letter left on a washstand by a milliner from Missouri who had looked at this country and gone home. She said she came up on Ollie Fisk's wagon on the 19th of September, and that Elias Rourke's house had burned on the 8th, and that there were 4 men in Bowie who had seen the light of it from the freight yard on the night it happened, and she gave their names too. It took her the better part of a morning to say. Deacon wrote it down. And when he was done writing, he sat back and he looked at her for a long time, and he said, I have this from Deacon himself, years after when he was dying and wanted to talk, and he told it to me with his eyes shut. He said, Girl, do you know what you've just done? Because it was October of 1886, because Geronimo had come in at Skeleton Canyon in September, and the trains had already gone east out of Bowie Station with 380-some Chiricahua on them, the ones who fought and the ones who never did, the scouts who'd served the army and the children who'd never held anything but a doll, all of them, all together, to Florida. And the ones who hadn't been on those trains were being found. That was the whole business of the territory that autumn. Finding the rest. And she had walked into a government office and written her name on a piece of paper. Deacon told me he sat there with the pen in his hand, and he thought about not writing it. He said he thought about it for as long as a man can think about a thing before his hand moves anyway. He wrote it. She said, Now you have a woman who came on the 19th. Now the fire on the 8th belongs to a chimney. And she walked back 11 miles. Elias found out 4 days later, from Ollie in the yard, standing next to a wagon. He didn't shout. I'd expected shouting. He went into the barn and came out with her flour sack in his hand, the one she'd carried in with something square in the bottom of it, which was a Bible mission issue with 3 names in the front and 2 of them crossed out, and he stood holding it and he couldn't seem to remember what he'd meant to do with it. You could have gone anywhere, he said. You could have gone to California. Nobody knew your name. Nobody in the world knew your name, and you gave it to a sheriff for a chimney. For you. For a man with nothing. And she crossed that yard and hit him. Open hand, hard, across the face, and the sound of it went out over the draw and came back off the rocks, and Juno threw her head up in the corral. Say it again, she said. He didn't. She was crying. It was the only time. She stood there in front of him with her fists closed and her face wet and absolutely still, no sound at all, just the water running down, and she said, I had a husband. I had a brother. I had a mother who is buried in a place I will never see again because it is under a road now. Everything I owned is gone, Elias Rourke. Everything. And you sit in your ashes and hold a piece of iron and tell me the world has taken something from you that cannot be born. She put her hand flat on his chest, over the vest pocket where the 2 letters were. It can be born, she said. I am standing here. It can be born. He sold the 40 to Holly's Teague on the 11th of November for $250. Teague went into the bank in Bowie with him and stood at the counter and said that he had personally seen the crack in that chimney board in 1878 and would swear to it, and the banker took the 250 and wrote off the difference against a bad year and a lien on nothing, because a bank doesn't want 40 acres of hardpan any more than a man does. It's the well they want. It was always the well. The drifter in the Bowie jail was let go in December for want of any evidence at all and walked out of the territory, and I hope he had better luck elsewhere, though the odds are against it. They were married by a Methodist in Bowie on a Tuesday with Ollie Fisk and me for witnesses. She wore the gray dress. She'd washed it 11 times and it had never come clean, and there was a grayness in it that was Elias Rourke's house, and she stood up in front of a preacher wearing his house, and I don't believe she did it on purpose, and I don't believe it was an accident either. He gave her the trivet. That was the whole of the ceremony that mattered. He put that black iron thing in her 2 hands like it was a ring. They went north in the spring, to a place near Fort Grant where a man could rent ground and pay in shares, and they took Juno and a hinge and a warped coffee tin, and $81, which was what remained after the bank and the preacher and a wagon. I wrote it in the book, Rourke beans 1 bowl settled. He'd left $1 on my table. I never spent it. Now here's the last of it, and then I'm done. In 1889, a letter came to me from Fort Grant in her hand. Because his hand had gone bad, he'd caught it in a windlass and lost the use of 2 fingers, which he mentioned the way another man mentions weather. They had a boy. They had 11 acres in shares and a milk cow and a house of adobe, 1 room, no floor. And at the bottom, in the same steady mission school script, she wrote that a man from the Indian office had come out to the place in February and asked her some questions and looked at some papers, and had gone away again, and would likely come back. She didn't ask me for anything. She wanted it known, is all. She wanted it written down somewhere that wasn't a government box. I've got the letter. It's in the flower crock with the ink page. I ride out to the old workplace sometimes, though there's nothing there now but Teague's stock tank and a windmill and the well, which is still the best water in the draw. The barn fell in around 95. You can see the rectangle where the house was if you know to look. Grass grows different over a burn. Greener, thicker. Takes about 10 years and then you can't tell it from anywhere else. Last time I went, I got down and walked it. 68 years old and going through the grass with my boot the way he went through the ash, 6 feet at a time, and I don't know what I was looking for. I found a nail. I stood there in the middle of that field with a nail in my hand for a long while, and the wind came up the draw out of the south, and I thought about how a man will tell you what he owns and be wrong about every item on the list. I put it in my pocket. I've still got it.